For 7 years, Sophia Harper lived in absolute darkness. Her father, a Hells Angels president, spent everything trying to fix it. Dozens of doctors, thousands of dollars, zero results. Then, a homeless 10-year-old black boy with no medical training walked up to her in a park, reached toward her eye, and did the impossible. In 30 seconds, she saw light for the first time in her life. But what that biker did for that homeless boy 60 seconds later, that's the part you never saw coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story, Daddy. The word hung in the air like a question mark, shaped from hope alone. Sophia Harper's lips formed the sound carefully, deliberately, the way a sculptor might shape clay without ever seeing the final form. Her voice was soft, tentative, reaching out into a world she had never truly experienced. Marcus Harper heard it, but Sophia couldn't see his response. She couldn't see anything, not the warm smile spreading across her father's weathered face as he turned toward her. Not the gentle movement of his leather jacket, not the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, not even her own hands reaching out to find him. For 7 years, Sophia had lived in absolute darkness, a darkness so complete, so total, that every step she took was nothing more than an educated guess. She remembered where furniture was placed because she'd memorized it 1,000 times, navigating by touch and sound, trusting that nothing had moved. But she had never seen it, not once. Marcus stood there in the doorway of their small Atlanta home, watching his 7-year-old daughter try to navigate a world that existed only in darkness. His jaw tightened, not from anger, not from frustration, but from a pain so deep, so profound, that it had carved permanent lines into his weathered face. This was a man who'd survived decades in the Hells Angels, a man who carried scars from fights, highways, and losses that would have broken most people. Marcus Ironhand Harper wasn't a man easily shaken, but watching his daughter live in darkness, that shook him every single day. Sophia tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when trying to sense where things were. Her small fingers reached up, touching gently near her right eye, trying to ease some invisible pressure that had been there for as long as anyone could remember. She winced, just barely, but Marcus caught it. He caught everything. He'd spent thousands of dollars trying to fix this. Ophthalmologists, specialists, neurologists, pediatric eye surgeons with impressive credentials and even more impressive bills. They'd all taken his money. They'd all run their tests. They'd all offered their theories. Optic nerve damage. Some said congenital defect. Others suggested developmental abnormality, retinal dysfunction. The medical jargon came fast and clinical, but the answers never did. Every appointment ended the same way, with shrugs, apologies, and another referral to yet another specialist who couldn't help. Sophia had learned to navigate by sound. She'd learned to feel textures and temperatures. She'd learned to exist in a world that moved and shifted and glowed around her while she remained locked in darkness, and she did it with more grace than most adults could manage. But Marcus saw the confusion on her face when other children described colors she couldn't comprehend. He saw the way she'd place her tiny hand on his face when he spoke, trying to understand expressions through touch since she couldn't see them. He saw her frustration when she tried to draw pictures like other kids, her hand moving across paper she couldn't see, creating shapes that existed only in her imagination. It wasn't fair, and Marcus Harper, a man who'd made peace with most of life's injustices, couldn't make peace with this one. So, he did what he rarely allowed himself to do. He took a day off. He pushed aside the club business, the rides, the brotherhood obligations that usually consumed his time. He dressed Sophia in her favorite soft pink dress, the one that made her feel like a princess, packed a small bag with snacks and juice boxes, and decided to take her to the neighborhood park. Maybe the fresh air would help. Maybe the swings would bring her joy. Maybe for just one afternoon, he could give her a moment of happiness that didn't require sight. It was a small hope, a modest goal. But what Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known as he buckled Sophia into his truck and headed toward that park, was that the answer to 7 years of darkness was already there waiting, sitting on a worn wooden bench just 20 ft from where they'd soon stand. And it wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a specialist with decades of training or access to expensive medical equipment. It was a 10-year-old homeless black boy who'd learned to survive by noticing what everyone else missed. If you've ever watched someone you love struggle with something you can't fix, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next proves that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. And if you believe in miracles, stick with me. The first doctor's appointment happened when Sophia was 8 months old. Marcus had noticed it early. The way she didn't track movement with her eyes, didn't reach for colorful toys placed in front of her, didn't respond to the visual world that surrounded her. The pediatrician was reassuring. "Give it time," she'd said. "Some babies develop more slowly than others." So, Marcus gave it time. 6 months later, when Sophia still hadn't responded to a single visual stimulus, he took her to a specialist, then another, then another. The waiting rooms all looked the same. Sterile, cold, filled with outdated magazines and the quiet desperation of parents seeking answers. Marcus sat in those chairs dozens of times. Sophia on his lap, her small body nestled against his leather jacket, completely unaware of the conversations happening around her in examination rooms, with bright lights she couldn't perceive. The tests were exhaustive. Visual acuity testing, electroretinography, visual evoked potential tests, OCT scans, and MRI imaging. Each one more expensive than the last, each one promising clarity that never came. Mr. Harper, the optic nerve appears structurally intact. Mr. Harper, there's no retinal damage we can identify. Mr. Harper, this is quite unusual. We're not seeing the typical markers of congenital blindness. The medical terminology became a language Marcus learned to hate. Words like idiopathic, unexplained etiology, and "we'll need to run more tests" became the soundtrack to his frustration. They weren't answers. They were expensive ways of saying, "we don't know." Marcus paid every bill without hesitation. Money wasn't the issue. He'd spend every dollar he had if it meant giving Sophia her sight. But the problem was that no amount of money seemed to matter. One specialist suggested advanced corrective lenses. They fitted Sophia with specialized glasses that magnified and enhanced light. She wore them for 3 months before the doctor admitted they weren't helping. Another recommended experimental gene therapy. Marcus researched it obsessively, stayed up nights reading medical journals and clinical trial results, and prepared himself for the procedure. But when they did the pre-treatment evaluation, the surgeon shook his head. "Her case doesn't fit the typical profile. I'm not confident the therapy would be effective. More money, more tests, more appointments that ended with sympathetic looks, and no solutions. What made it worse? What made Marcus's jaw clench and his hands ball into fists during those appointments was that Sophia clearly felt something. She'd touch near her right eye, always the right, and gently press with those tiny fingers. Sometimes she'd wince. Sometimes she'd rub at it absently, like there was pressure building inside that she couldn't explain. Marcus mentioned it every single time. "Doctor, she keeps touching her right eye. Could there be something there? Some kind of obstruction?" They'd look. They'd shine their lights and examine her eye with instruments that cost more than most people's cars, using advanced imaging that could see every layer of tissue. "Everything appears clear, Mr. Harper. The eye looks normal. There's no obstruction we can detect." But the discomfort remained, and Sophia kept touching, kept pressing, kept trying to ease something that every trained medical professional assured Marcus didn't exist. By the time Sophia turned 7, Marcus had seen 17 different specialists. He'd spent over $40,000 on appointments, tests, scans, and consultations. He'd traveled to Miami, New Orleans, and even Houston, chasing recommendations and second opinions from doctors who claimed to be the best in their field. Every single one of them looked at MRI. Every single one of them missed what mattered. What they didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that every specialist failed to see what a 10-year-old boy would spot in seconds. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because while Marcus was exhausting every medical option in Atlanta, spending his days in sterile waiting rooms, and his nights researching miracle cures, another story was unfolding just 3 miles away. Meanwhile, 3 miles across Atlanta, another child was fighting a completely different battle, one of survival. Jamal didn't remember his mother's face anymore. Not clearly, anyway, just fragments. The warmth of her hand holding his. The sound of her humming songs he could no longer name. The way she'd stroke his hair when thunder scared him at night. What he did remember with painful clarity was the night the shelter caught fire. He was 7 years old. The smoke alarm screamed through the building, pulling families from their cots and mattresses, sending everyone scrambling toward the exits in panic. Jamal remembered his mother pushing him forward, her hands firm on his shoulders, guiding him through the chaos toward safety. He made it out. She didn't. They told him it was smoke inhalation. They told him she didn't suffer. They told him a lot of things that were supposed to make a 7-year-old feel better about losing the only person who'd ever loved him. None of it helped. His father lasted another 8 months. 8 months of showing up drunk, then not showing up at all. 8 months of broken promises and empty apologies until one morning, Jamal woke up in their motel room and his father was just gone. No note, no explanation, no goodbye, just gone. Jamal was 8 years old and he was completely alone. Most kids would have panicked, would have gone to authorities, to child services, to anyone who might help. But Jamal had learned early that the system didn't always work the way people claimed it did. He'd seen other kids disappear into foster care, bouncing from home to home, their eyes growing harder with each move. So Jamal made a different choice. He chose to survive on his own terms. He didn't beg. Something in him. Pride, maybe. Or his mother's voice still echoing in his memory. Refused to hold out his hand and ask for pity. He didn't steal either. His mother had taught him better than that. Instead, Jamal learned to help. He'd hover near diners during the morning rush, offering to bust tables or sweep floors in exchange for breakfast. He'd linger behind barber shops, helping elderly barbers carry out trash or sweep up hair clippings, earning a few dollars and sometimes a sandwich. He'd find food stalls at the edge of parking lots and volunteer to help vendors pack up at the end of the day, receiving whatever didn't sell. He lived in the corners of life, the spaces between buildings, the alleys behind restaurants, the park benches that nobody else wanted. He kept himself clean as best he could using gas station bathrooms. He wore the same faded cargo shorts and hand-me-down shirts until they were threadbare. And he learned to be invisible. When you're homeless and 10 years old, invisibility is survival. You don't draw attention. You don't make noise. You simply exist quietly, hoping nobody notices you long enough to ask questions you can't answer. But here's what happened. When Jamal became invisible to everyone else, he started seeing things other people missed. Jamal had a gift nobody knew about. A gift born from desperation. He could read pain in people's faces and bodies. He'd spent so long being invisible that he'd learned to see what others missed. The slight squint of an old woman with vision problems. The way a construction worker shielded his eyes from bright light. The exhaustion in a waitress's eyes after a double shift. Jamal saw suffering because he knew it intimately. 6 months earlier, behind a diner on Peachtree Street, He noticed an elderly man sitting on a milk crate, squinting and rubbing his eye in obvious discomfort. Jamal had approached carefully, the way he always did, and asked if the man was okay. "Something stuck in there," the old man had muttered. "Been driving me crazy for days. Can't see worth a damn?" Jamal had looked carefully, and there, just visible on the surface of the eye, was a tiny foreign object. A sliver of something that had lodged itself under the eyelid and scratched across the cornea with every blink. Jamal had seen similar things before. His mother had once helped the neighbor with the same problem, using clean water and patience. He'd helped the old man that day carefully, gently, and when the irritant finally came free, the relief on the man's face was immediate. "Kid," the man had said, blinking tears of relief, "you just gave me back my sight." Jamal never forgot that moment. If you can't stand how children like Jamal are forgotten by society, comment "Every child deserves a home" down below. Let's remind ourselves what matters. And that memory, that one random act of kindness behind a greasy diner, was about to save a little girl's world. The park on West End Avenue wasn't much. A few swings with rusted chains, a slide that had seen better decades, patchy grass that turned brown every summer and barely recovered by fall. But it was quiet, and on that particular Tuesday afternoon in late October, it was exactly what Marcus needed. He pulled his truck into the gravel lot, killed the engine, and looked over at Sophia in the passenger seat. She was already unbuckling herself, her face turned toward the sound of children playing. Excitement evident despite not being able to see what awaited her. Marcus managed a small smile. This was all he wanted. Just one good day, one afternoon, where his daughter could feel joy without the weight of her darkness pressing down on both of them. Sophia moved toward the swings carefully, one hand extended slightly, feeling her way forward. Her pink dress caught the sunlight that she couldn't see, her small feet moving cautiously across unfamiliar ground. Marcus followed close behind, ready to guide her, his boots heavy on the ground. His mind still turning over the latest failed doctor's appointment from 3 days earlier. He was tired, not physically, but tired in the way that comes from years of trying and failing. Tired of hope that led nowhere. 20th away, sitting on a worn wooden bench near the basketball court, Jamal watched them arrive. He'd been there for about an hour in his usual spot when he needed a place to rest during the day. The park was safe. Families came and went. Nobody paid attention to a quiet kid on a bench. As long as he didn't cause trouble, didn't approach anyone, didn't draw attention, he could sit there for hours without anyone asking questions. Jamal had learned to occupy himself by observing. Watching people became both entertainment and education. He'd study how families interacted, how parents responded to their children, how people moved through the world with the casual confidence that came from having a home to return to. He noticed everything. So when Sophia walked past him toward the swings, Jamal noticed immediately the way she moved, the cautious steps, the slightly extended hand feeling for obstacles, the unfocused gaze that didn't quite track movement, the way her other hand drifted up to touch near her right eye, pressing gently as if trying to relieve pressure. Jamal sat up straighter. Sophia reached the swing with her father's help. He pushed her gently from behind. She smiled, tilting her head back toward the sunlight she couldn't see. But every few seconds, her hand would drift back to her right eye. The gentle pressure she applied with her fingertips, trying to ease something nobody else seemed to notice. Jamal's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward on the bench, watching more carefully now. The angle of Sophia's head, the way the afternoon sun illuminated her face. And that's when Jamal saw it, just barely visible at the corner of her right eye. Something that shouldn't be there. A tiny translucent mass, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for, and caught it in just the right light. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. He knew exactly what that was. A growth on the surface of the eye. Probably there since birth, slowly expanding over the years. Not inside, where doctors would scan and image, but right there on the surface, so thin and clear it was nearly invisible. The kind of thing that would create constant pressure, block light from entering properly, and if positioned just right over the pupil, cause complete vision loss. Jamal's heart started pounding. His hands gripped the edge of the wooden bench until his knuckles turned white. He could help her. He knew he could. It would take 30 seconds, maybe less. One careful removal, and that little girl could see for the first time in who knows how long. But Jamal also knew what would happen if he approached her. He'd spent 2 years learning to be invisible precisely because approaching people, especially children, when you looked like he did was dangerous. The father was right there, a big man, intimidating, the kind of man who wouldn't hesitate to protect his daughter from a strange, barefoot kid with scraped knees and unwashed clothes. If Jamal approached her, the man might grab him, might hurt him, might call the police. And then what? Foster care. Questions he couldn't answer. The end of his freedom. But if he didn't approach her, that little girl would stay blind forever. When the solution was right there, when he could fix it in seconds, Jamal's heart started racing. He knew exactly what was wrong, but he also knew what would happen if he approached a biker's daughter uninvited. He had seconds to decide. Stay safe and invisible, or risk everything to help. Jamal's decision came in the space between heartbeats. One moment he was frozen on that bench, paralyzed by fear and self-preservation. Next, his body was moving before his mind could talk him out of it. He jumped up, his bare feet hitting the dusty ground with purpose. Sophia had stepped off the swing and was moving slowly toward the slide. Her hands extended slightly, feeling her way. She was maybe 15 ft away from Jamal now, moving in that careful, cautious way. Jamal started walking toward her. His heart hammered so violently in his chest, he thought it might crack his ribs. Every survival instinct he had honed over 2 years of living on the streets screamed at him to stop, to sit back down, to stay invisible. But he kept walking. Sophia sensed someone approaching the sound of footsteps on gravel. She turned her head toward the sound, her unfocused eyes not quite finding him. Curious, but not afraid. Marcus saw too. The reaction was immediate and primal. Marcus's body shifted between Jamal and Sophia before conscious thought even registered. His hand came up, palm out, a barrier of flesh and authority. "Hey," Marcus's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade. "Back up." Jamal stopped immediately. His hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm, but he didn't back away. His eyes were locked on Sophia, specifically on her right eye, and the urgency in his face was unmistakable. "I'm sorry," Jamal said quickly, his voice higher than he wanted it to be, cracking slightly with nervousness. "I'm sorry, but please," I said. "Back up, kid." Marcus's tone left no room for negotiation. He was a full foot taller than Jamal, broader, harder, a man who'd spent decades making people listen when he spoke. But Jamal shook his head, the movement quick and desperate. "Please," he repeated. And this time there was something in his voice that made Marcus hesitate. Not fear, not manipulation, just raw, genuine concern. "Something's on her eye. I can see it. I think I can help." Marcus's jaw tightened. This was Atlanta. Homeless kids approached people all the time with stories, with angles, with reasons why you should give them money or attention or trust. Marcus had heard them all. He developed a thick skin against sob stories and manipulation. But this kid wasn't asking for money, wasn't even looking at Marcus. His entire focus was on Sophia, and the expression on his face was one Marcus recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror for 7 years. desperation to help someone who was suffering. Marcus's hand shot out and grabbed Jamal's wrist, not violently but firmly, a warning and a restraint all at once. "You've got 5 seconds to explain yourself," Marcus said quietly. The kind of quiet that was more threatening than shouting. Jamal looked up at him. Those sharp eyes that had seemed too much for a 10-year-old, meeting Marcus's without flinching. "There's something on her eye," Jamal said, speaking fast but clearly. "A growth on the surface. Probably been there since birth. I can see it when the light hits, right? It's covering her pupil. That's why she keeps touching it. That's why she can't see. I've helped with this kind of thing before. I know what to do. Please, just let me try. If you're holding your breath right now, you're not alone. Hit that like button if you want to see this boy prove everyone wrong." Marcus stared at him. His grip on Jamal's wrist didn't loosen, but something shifted in his expression. Doubt, maybe, or desperate hope, wearing the disguise of skepticism. Sophia stood there between them, unaware of the tension, her hand once again drifting to her eye. Marcus made his decision. He didn't release Jamal's wrist. Not yet. But he stepped aside just enough to give the boy a narrow path to his daughter. What happened in the next 10 seconds would either end in a homeless boy getting hurt, or a miracle no one saw coming. Jamal moved slowly, deliberately, every motion telegraphed and careful, as if approaching a frightened animal. Sophia sensed him getting closer, turned her face toward the sound of his movement, her head tilted in that familiar way, completely unaware that the next 30 seconds would change her entire world. "I need to look at her eye," Jamal said softly, more to Marcus than to Sophia. "I won't hurt her, I promise." Marcus's grip on Jamal's wrist tightened for just a moment. A final warning, a final hesitation, and then loosened slightly. Not a release, just enough slack for Jamal to move. Jamal knelt down, bringing himself to Sophia's eye level. He smiled at her even though he knew she couldn't see it. Sophia smiled back, innocent and trusting in the way only children can be, responding to the gentle tone of his presence. "Hi," Jamal whispered. "This might feel weird for a second, but I'm going to help you, okay?" Sophia's unfocused eyes surged in his direction, trying to make sense of the voice. Jamal leaned in closer. His right hand came up, fingers extended, approaching Sophia's right eye with the kind of precision that seemed impossible for a 10-year-old boy. But Jamal had learned precision from necessity. When you survive by helping others, you learn to be gentle, to be careful, to not harm. Marcus stood over them both, his body coiled tight as a spring, his hand still wrapped around Jamal's wrist. One wrong move, one indication that this kid meant harm. One cry from Sophia, and Marcus would pull him away so fast the boy's feet would leave the ground. But Jamal's fingers were steady. He tilted Sophia's head just slightly, angling it to catch the afternoon sunlight. And there it was, the translucent growth visible now that he was close enough, and the light hit it perfectly. A thin membrane covering the center of her eye, so clear it was almost invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. Jamal's index finger and thumb moved into position. Slow, careful. His touch was feather light as he made contact with the edge of the growth. Sophia's eyes widened slightly at the sensation. Foreign, strange, but not painful. Marcus's breathing stopped entirely. His grip tightened again on Jamal's wrist, knuckles white, ready to yank the boy back at the first sign of distress from his daughter. Jamal began to lift. Not roughly, not quickly, just steady, gentle pressure, peeling the membrane free from where it had been attached for who knows how long. Seconds stretched into eternity. The growth resisted at first, held in place by years of natural adhesion. Jamal adjusted his angle slightly, his young face a mask of concentration. His bottom lip caught between his teeth, and then it moved. The thin, translucent membrane began to lift free millimeter by millimeter, carefully drawn away by Jamal's precise touch. It was larger than Marcus expected, nearly covering Sophia's entire pupil, a gossamer film that had blocked light from entering her eye properly. Jamal held it in his fingers for just a moment. Proof, evidence, the answer to 7 years of medical failures. And then he let it fall away. Silence. A beat of absolute nothing. Sophia stood completely still, her eyes unfocused, her expression frozen somewhere between confusion and shock. Something had changed, something fundamental, something she couldn't yet name. And then light flooded in. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once. 7 years of accumulated visual information hit her brain simultaneously. Colors, shapes, movement, depth, brightness, everything. Her breath hitched, a sharp, sudden intake of air that had nothing to do with breathing and everything to do with overwhelming sensation. Her eyes widened, pupils contracting against the sudden influx of light. Her entire body going rigid. The world exploded into existence. The blue sky above, the green trees swaying in the breeze, the other children on the playground in their bright clothes, the ground beneath her feet, her own hands in front of her face. Her father's face, this face she'd only known through touch, was now visible for the first time. And colors. Oh God, colors. Sophia's hands flew to her face, both of them, as if trying to confirm that the sensation was real. Her lips trembled, her chin quivered. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and fast, and unstoppable. She looked up at her father. This man she'd known her entire life, but had never truly seen. And her voice came out cracked and broken and more beautiful than any sound Marcus had ever heard in his life. "Daddy," she whispered. The word shaped by memory, but spoken with sight for the very first time. "I can see you, Marcus." Iron Hand Harper had been in bar fights that left men unconscious. He'd ridden through thunderstorms that turned highways into rivers. He'd buried brothers who died too young and stood at gravesides without shedding a tear, because that's what being strong meant in his world. But seeing his daughter's eyes finally focus on his face for the first time in her life, that broke him completely. His knees went weak. Actually, weak. The toughest man in Georgia felt his legs tremble beneath him, felt the ground shift like he'd been hit with something he couldn't fight back against. He released Jamal's wrist, forgot he was even holding it, and dropped into a crouch in front of Sophia. His hands reached for her face, needing to see her eyes, needing to confirm this was real. Sophia's hands were still touching her face, fingers trembling, her entire body vibrating with the overwhelming sensation of a world that had suddenly become visible. "Daddy," she said again. And this time she saw his face when she said it, saw his expression, the tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. You're crying. I can see you crying." "I can see," she whispered, testing the words, watching her father's face react to them. "Daddy, I can see you, I can see everything." Her voice rose with each word, climbing from whisper to speaking volume, as if she needed to confirm the magnitude of what was happening. And Marcus, this hardened man who'd spent decades building walls around his emotions, felt every single one of those walls crumble into dust. Tears poured down his face, not quiet tears, not dignified ones, but the kind that come from somewhere deep in the chest, from a place that holds 7 years of helplessness and frustration. And watching your child struggle with something you couldn't fix, no matter how hard you tried. He pulled Sophia into his arms and held her so tight it probably hurt, but she didn't complain. She pulled back just enough to look at his face, to study every line, every scar, every detail she'd only imagined before. "The sky is blue," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Daddy, the sky is so blue and the trees are green and your eyes are brown. Everything is so much." Marcus couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely. All he could do was nod and hold her and cry in a way he hadn't cried since he was a child himself. And then he remembered Jamal. Marcus looked up, his vision blurred with tears, and found the boy standing a few feet away. Jamal had backed up after the removal, giving them space, his bare feet shifting nervously on the dusty ground. His face carried an expression Marcus had seen before on the faces of combat veterans. The look of someone who'd just done something impossible and couldn't quite process it themselves. 7 years, thousands of dollars, dozens of specialists with impressive degrees and expensive equipment, and access to the latest medical technology. And a barefoot 10-year-old boy did what none of them could. Marcus stood slowly, still holding Sophia against his chest with one arm. He looked at Jamal, really looked at him, seeing not just a homeless kid, but someone who'd just fundamentally altered the course of his daughter's entire life. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice shook in a way none of his bikers had ever heard. Not from anger, not from intimidation, but from gratitude so profound it changed the texture of every word. "Kid," Marcus breathed, barely getting the word out. "You changed my little girl's life." Jamal shrugged slightly, almost apologetically, his eyes dropping to the ground. "I just wanted to help," he said quietly. "If you believe this boy deserves everything after what he just did, comment Jamal is a hero. If you think kids like him should never be homeless, share this story. Make some noise for the invisible children." Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing tears across weathered skin. And in that moment, looking at this skinny, barefoot boy who'd given him a miracle, Marcus made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. Marcus didn't think. There was no internal debate, no weighing of options or consideration of consequences. Some decisions bypass the mind entirely and come straight from somewhere deeper, from the gut, from the heart, from whatever part of a person recognizes truth when it stands in front of them. This was one of those decisions. Marcus looked at Jamal, this child who'd spent 2 years surviving alone, who'd approached a stranger's daughter despite every instinct, telling him to stay invisible, who'd risked everything to help someone he didn't know, and saw something he recognized. He saw someone worth protecting. Marcus's hands moved to his shoulders, fingers finding the worn leather of his Hell's Angels vest. The cut, as they called it, was the sacred garment that represented everything he was, everything he had earned over decades of loyalty and brotherhood. It was warm from the Georgia sun, heavy with the weight of patches and pins and memories stitched into every inch of leather. He lifted it off. The movement was slow, deliberate, ceremonial, like removing a crown to place it on another's head. Jamal watched with wide eyes, not understanding what was happening, his body tensing as if preparing to run. Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. And then he draped the vest over Jamal's small shoulders. The leather swallowed the boy. It hung past his waist, the armholes gaping, the bottom hem nearly reaching his knees. Jamal stood there frozen, his thin frame barely filling a quarter of the space that Marcus's broad shoulders had occupied moments before. But the weight of it, the actual physical weight of leather and history and belonging, settled onto Jamal's shoulders like an anchor, like something solid in a world that had been weightless and uncertain for too long. "You're not alone anymore," Marcus said, his voice rough but steady now, each word carefully placed like stones building a foundation. "You stay with us now." Jamal's lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes went glassy with tears. He was trying desperately not to shed. His hands came up slowly, fingers touching the leather as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. I can't. Jamal's voice cracked completely. I'm nobody. You're my daughter's miracle. Marcus interrupted his tone, leaving no room for argument. That makes you family. And family doesn't sleep on park benches. Family doesn't go hungry. Family doesn't survive. Family lives. You understand me? Jamal nodded, though his face suggested he didn't quite believe what was happening. Kids who'd been abandoned learned not to trust good things, learned that kindness usually came with conditions, with expectations, with expiration dates. But there was something in Marcus's eyes, something unshakable and absolute that cut through Jamal's defenses like a blade through paper. Sophia pulled away from her father just enough to look at Jamal. Her eyes, those eyes that could finally see, wet with tears, but lit up with joy that made her look like she was glowing from the inside. "You're staying?" she asked, her voice full of wonder and hope. Seeing his face clearly for the first time, Jamal looked down at her, then back at Marcus, then down at the vest, drowning his small frame. "I'm staying," he whispered, and saying it out loud made it feel real in a way nothing had felt real in 2 years. Marcus placed his hand on top of Jamal's head, the gesture somewhere between a blessing and a claim. This boy was his now, his responsibility, his family. "We'll get you cleaned up," Marcus said, his mind already moving through logistics, through what Jamal would need. Food, clothes, a bed, school enrollment, medical care, everything a child should have had all along. Get you fed, get you home. Home. Jamal had forgotten what that word meant. But Marcus wasn't the only one who'd have a say in Jamal's future. When the rest of the Brotherhood heard what happened, something unprecedented occurred. Word traveled fast in the Hells Angels. Marcus made one phone call from the park, just one, to his vice president, a man named Dutch, who'd ridden beside him for 15 years. Marcus's voice was still shaking when he explained what had happened, what Jamal had done, what he'd decided. "Bring everyone to the clubhouse," Marcus said. "I need the brothers to meet someone." Within an hour, motorcycles began rolling into the parking lot of the Hells Angels clubhouse on the east side of Atlanta. The rumble of engines announced each arrival, deep, throaty roars that vibrated through the walls and rattled the windows. One bike, then 3, then 7, then a dozen. Men climbed off their machines, pulling helmets free, their leather cuts bearing the same red and white patches that Marcus wore. These were men society had labeled as dangerous, as outlaws, as people to be feared and avoided, and they were all gathering to meet a 10-year-old homeless black boy. Jamal stood in the corner of the clubhouse common room, still wearing Marcus's oversized vest, trying to make himself as small and invisible as possible. Sophia sat beside him on a worn couch, her hand clasped in his, refusing to let go. She kept looking around, discovering new things with her eyes. The texture of the walls, the faces of people, the way light moved through windows. The bikers filed in their boots heavy on concrete floors. Massive men with scarred knuckles and weathered faces. Men who'd seen violence and survived it. Men who trusted no one outside their brotherhood. They looked at Jamal with expressions that made the boy's stomach clench with fear. But then Marcus told them the story. He stood in the center of the room, Sophia on his hip now, and explained everything. The 7 years of darkness, the failed doctors, the park, Jamal's observation, the removal, Sophia's first moment of sight. "This kid," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, "gave my daughter something I couldn't buy, something specialists with fancy degrees couldn't provide. He gave her the world." The room fell silent. One of the older bikers, a man called Hammer, whose real name nobody remembered anymore, stepped forward. His face was a road map of scars and sun damage, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. He looked Jamal up and down, taking in the bare feet, the dirty clothes, the fear barely hidden behind defensive eyes. "How old are you, kid?" Hammer asked, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes and shouting over engine noise. 10, Jamal answered quietly, his voice almost disappearing into the ambient sounds of the room. Hammer nodded slowly. Then he looked at Marcus. "He got people family somewhere." "No," Marcus said simply. "He's been surviving on his own for 2 years." Something shifted in the room. The atmosphere changed in an almost tangible way. These men who rarely trusted outsiders, who'd been rejected by society themselves, who'd built their own family precisely because the world had pushed them out, didn't see Jamal as charity. They saw themselves in him. Every single one of them had a story: an absent father, an abusive home, a system that failed them, a world that decided they were worthless before they were old enough to prove otherwise. They'd all been Jamal at some point, alone, struggling, surviving on instinct and desperation. Dutch, the vice president, spoke next. He was younger than Marcus, but carried the same authority, the same presence that came from earning respect rather than demanding it. "President's making him family," Dutch said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "Anyone got a problem with that?" Silence. Then Hammer stepped forward again, this time approaching Jamal directly. The boy tensed, every muscle in his body preparing to run, even though he had nowhere to go. Hammer extended his hand. "Welcome home, kid," he said simply. Jamal stared at the offered hand for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was real or some elaborate setup for disappointment. Then slowly, he reached out and shook it. His small hand disappeared completely inside Hammer's calloused grip. One by one, the other bikers stepped forward. Each one shook Jamal's hand. Each one welcomed him, not with pity, not with condescension, but with the same respect they'd show any prospect joining their ranks. "We'll set him up in the back room," someone said. "Kid needs clothes," another added. "I've got nephews about his size. I'll bring some things tomorrow." "School," a third voice chimed in. "He'll need to get enrolled. My old lady works at the district office. She can help with that." The logistics came fast, each brother offering something practical, something concrete. This wasn't empty charity. This wasn't a feel-good gesture that would fade when the emotion wore off. This was a brotherhood absorbing a new member, making space in their lives for someone who needed them. Marcus watched it happen with something close to awe. He'd expected support. His brothers always had his back. But this was different. This was unanimous, instant, and absolute. Jamal wasn't being tolerated. He was being claimed. By the end of the evening, Jamal had a room at the clubhouse, not a cot in a corner, but an actual room with a door that locked from the inside and a bed with clean sheets. He had a drawer full of clothes that would arrive the next day. He had a list of brothers who'd volunteered to help him with homework, teach him to ride safely when he was old enough, show him how to fix engines and change oil, and survive with dignity. He had protection, he had structure, he had family, but the most beautiful part. It wasn't even over yet because Sophia had one more gift to give Jamal. And it happened every single night. Jamal's first night in the clubhouse, he didn't sleep. He lay in that bed with clean sheets and a pillow that didn't smell like mildew or exhaust fumes, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for someone to burst through the door and tell him it was all a mistake, that he didn't belong, that he needed to leave. But morning came, and no one told him to go. Marcus knocked on his door at 7. Carrying a plate of eggs and toast that one of the brothers had cooked in the clubhouse kitchen. Jamal ate slowly, still not quite trusting that the food wouldn't be taken away, that this wasn't temporary. "You'll need boots," Marcus said, watching Jamal eat. "Can't have you walking around barefoot anymore. We'll get you sorted today." And that's exactly what happened. By noon, Jamal had boots, real ones, with thick soles and laces that actually stayed tied. He had jeans that fit, t-shirts that didn't have holes, and a jacket for when the Georgia nights got cold. He stood in front of a mirror in the clubhouse bathroom and barely recognized himself. He looked like a kid who belonged somewhere. The transformation wasn't just external. Over the following weeks, the Brotherhood absorbed Jamal into their daily rhythm. Hammer taught him how engines worked, the difference between two-stroke and four-stroke, how to diagnose problems by sound alone, how to rebuild a carburetor with patience and precision. Jamal learned fast, his hands steady and careful. That same competence he'd shown helping strangers now channeled into something constructive. Dutch took him to the motorcycle safety course, explaining road rules and defensive driving, even though Jamal was years away from being able to ride legally. "Knowledge first," Dutch said. "Speed later. You stay alive by being smart, not reckless." Another brother, a quiet man named Rev, who rarely spoke but listened to everything, taught Jamal about honor, about keeping your word, about the difference between surviving and living with dignity. "You never begged," Rev said one afternoon while they were cleaning bikes in the clubhouse garage. "You never stole. You survived by helping people. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Jamal looked up from the chrome he was polishing, surprised. "You noticed that?" Marcus told us, Rev said simply. "And yeah, we noticed. That's why you're here, kid. Not because we felt sorry for you, but because you've got character. You've got integrity. Those things matter more than blood. Remember, Jamal never begged, never stole. He survived by helping. And now, for the first time, people were helping him back." The change in Jamal was visible, not overnight. Healing never happens overnight, but gradually, like spring thaw, revealing ground that had been frozen for too long. His shoulders straightened. His eyes lost that constant weariness, that perpetual scanning for threats. He smiled more, laughed, even when one of the brothers told a terrible joke, or when Sophia insisted on showing him another thing she'd discovered with her new sight. Marcus enrolled him in school, the local elementary, 5th grade. Jamal had missed significant chunks of education during his 2 years on the streets, but he caught up fast. Turned out a kid who'd learned to survive by reading people and situations was also pretty good at reading books. His teachers noticed something unusual about him. A maturity beyond his years, a kindness toward other kids who seemed lost or alone. During lunch, Jamal would seek out the children sitting by themselves and ask if he could join them. He recognized isolation because he'd lived it. If this is making you emotional, you're human. Subscribe if you believe every child deserves this kind of second chance. Comment family isn't blood. If you agree that love is a choice. By the time November rolled into December, Jamal had been with the Brotherhood for 6 weeks. He had routine stability. He woke up in the same bed every morning, ate meals at regular times, did homework at the clubhouse dining table while bikers drank coffee, and argued about carburetors and politics. He had a life. But there was one part of his new reality that meant more to him than all the rest combined. One ritual that happened every single evening without fail involved the little girl who'd been the catalyst for everything. Every evening at 7:30, without fail, Sophia would appear at Jamal's door. She'd knock, 3 soft taps, and wait for him to answer. When he opened the door, she'd be standing there in her pajamas, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Is it time?" she'd ask, even though she already knew the answer. "It's time," Jamal would reply, smiling. And then Sophia would take his hand and lead him to the clubhouse common room, to the old couch near the window, and they'd sit together in the gathering darkness while she discovered the world. It had started accidentally that first week after the park. Sophia had been overwhelmed by sight. Every color was new, every shape unfamiliar and sometimes confusing. Bright lights made her squint and turn away. The sheer complexity of visual existence was too much all at once. But Jamal understood overwhelm. He'd lived it in a different way. So he'd sat with her one evening and started naming things, identifying objects, giving her context for the visual chaos flooding her senses. "That's the refrigerator," he'd said, pointing towards the kitchen. "It's white and tall. That's the color white." Sophia had stared, her eyes focusing and refocusing, trying to understand what white meant. "And that?" she'd asked, pointing toward the window. "That's the sunset," Jamal had answered. "The sky turns orange and pink and purple when the sun goes down. Those are colors too. They're beautiful." Her face had lit up with wonder, and so it became their ritual. Every night, Sophia would sit beside Jamal, her tiny fingers tugging at his sleeve whenever she saw something new. Something she couldn't identify, something that needed explanation. "Jamal, what's that?" became the question that shaped their evenings together. Jamal was endlessly patient. He never seemed annoyed by her constant questions, her need to categorize and understand every visual detail of the world around her. He'd lean close, look carefully, and then explain. "That's someone's shadow on the wall. See, when light hits you, it creates a dark shape behind you. That's a photograph. It's like freezing a moment in time so you can look at it forever. Those are stars, tiny lights in the sky. So far away they look small. There are millions of them. That's your own reflection in the window, Sophia. That's what you look like." That last one had made her gasp with delight, seeing her own face clearly for the first time. The reversal wasn't lost on Marcus, who often watched them from across the room. The boy who'd once been invisible, who'd survived in corners and alleys with no one to talk to, was now teaching, guiding, becoming someone's bridge to understanding. And the girl who'd lived in darkness, who'd navigated the world through touch and sound alone, was now asking questions, engaging, discovering that sight gave dimension to everything she'd only imagined before. They needed each other in ways that went beyond gratitude or obligation. Jamal gave Sophia context. Sophia gave Jamal purpose. Together they were healing wounds neither of them had words for. One evening, about a month after moving in, Sophia discovered colors in a new way. She'd been staring at a painting on the clubhouse wall, trying to understand why certain colors made her feel certain things, when she suddenly stopped and looked at Jamal with wide eyes. "Colors have feelings," she said, as if the realization had just struck her. "They do," Jamal confirmed, smiling. "Red can feel angry or excited. Blue can feel calm or sad. Yellow feels happy." "What color am I?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're all of them," he said finally. "You're every color at once." She beamed, and the joy on her face was brighter than any color in existence. The other bikers would sometimes pause their card games or their conversations to watch these two children, one teaching, one learning, and shake their heads in amazement at what had brought them all together. But there was one moment Sophia wanted to share more than any other. And when it finally happened, it broke everyone who witnessed it. 6 months changed everything. It was April when the Brotherhood gathered for what had become their monthly family dinner, a tradition that predated Jamal's arrival, but had taken on new meaning since he joined them. The clubhouse dining area was packed. Long tables pushed together, mismatched chairs filled with bikers and their families. The air was thick with the smell of grilled meat and laughter and belonging. Jamal sat in the middle of it all, surrounded by men who'd become his uncles, his teachers, his protectors. He wore a new vest now, not Marcus's oversized cut, but one made specifically for him. Leather still stiff and unmarked by road miles, but bearing a small patch that read, "Little Brother," across the back. Sophia sat beside him, as she always did, looking around excitedly at everything. Her eyes taking in every detail, every face, every movement. Her vision had grown stronger over the months. More confident, she could track fast movement now, recognize faces from across rooms, and she never stopped marveling at the gift of sight. Marcus watched them from across the room, a beer in his hand, a smile on his face that his brothers claimed had become permanent. Dutch stood beside him, following his gaze. "You did good, Press," Dutch said quietly. Marcus shook his head. "Jamal did good. I just recognized it." The dinner continued. Food passed. Stories shared. The kind of easy chaos that comes when family gathers without pretense or formality. Jamal was laughing at something Hammer had said. His face lit up in a way that erased every trace of the scared, barefoot boy from the park. And then Sophia stood up on her chair. The movement caught everyone's attention. Conversations paused, heads turned. Sophia was small for 7 years old, but standing on that chair, she commanded the room with the unself-conscious authority only children possess. She looked directly at Jamal, her eyes, those eyes that could finally see, locked on his face. She cupped her hands around her mouth, took a deep breath, and shouted at the top of her lungs, "I love you, Jamal!" Her voice carried through the entire clubhouse, clear and strong and filled with every ounce of affection a child's heart could hold. And this time, unlike every other time she tried to express love in her life, she could see his face when she said it, could see his expression change, could see the tears spring to his eyes, could see exactly what those words meant to him. The room went completely silent. Jamal's face crumpled, just completely fell apart. Tears streamed down his cheeks before he could even try to stop them, his shoulders shaking with the force of emotion he'd been holding back for months, maybe years, maybe his entire life. Because Jamal had never heard those words before, not once, not from his mother before she died, not from his father before he left, not from anyone in the 2 years he'd spent invisible and alone. He'd survived by being unwanted, by being forgettable, by accepting that love was something other people had, not something meant for him. But Sophia, this little girl whose world he'd opened with one careful touch, was shouting her love for him loud enough for everyone to hear. And she meant it, and she could see him receive it. Jamal couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He just sat there crying, while Sophia climbed down from her chair and threw her arms around his neck, holding him with the fierce protectiveness of a little sister who'd claimed him as her own. Marcus moved, then crossed the room in 3 long strides and placed his hand on Jamal's shoulder. Heavy, warm, unmistakable in its meaning. "You're my son now," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you are my children." Jamal looked up at him, tears still streaming, and nodded because words were impossible. "If you're crying, hit that like button. You're not alone. If you believe love like this should be shared, send this to someone who needs to remember that miracles are real. And if you want more stories that restore your faith in humanity, subscribe because I've got plenty more." The boy who lived in corners was now at the center of everything. The girl who lived in darkness now saw every beautiful thing the world had to offer. And the family that had formed in a park on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon was now unbreakable. 3 years have passed since that afternoon in the park. Jamal is 13 now. He's taller, his voice deeper, his bare feet long since replaced by boots he wears with the same pride he wears his vest. He's in 8th grade at Atlanta Middle School, And if you ask his teachers about him, they'll tell you he's one of the best students they've ever had. Not because he's naturally gifted, though he's certainly bright, but because he works harder than anyone else. Because he understands that education is a privilege, not a burden. Because he remembers what it felt like to have nothing, and he's determined never to waste the second chance he's been given. He's at the top of his class on the honor roll every semester. But more than that, he's become the kid who notices others, who finds the students eating lunch alone and sits with them, who helps struggling classmates with homework, who sees the invisible children because he used to be one. His teachers call him an old soul. His classmates call him a friend. The brotherhood calls him family. Sophia is 10 now, thriving in ways that seemed impossible just 3 years ago. Her vision remains fully functional. No complications, no regression. She's in art classes now, not because she needs them, but because she wants them. Determined to capture the visual world she'd missed, to create beauty with her own hands, to understand color and light and perspective. She's learning photography, joined the school art club, and spends her afternoons discovering visual expression the way other children discover sports or music. Sight, which was once absent from her world, has become her passion, and every single night she still sits with Jamal. Not to ask what's that anymore. She knows most things now, but simply to be near the person who gave her everything. But the story didn't end with Jamal and Sophia. 6 months after Jamal moved into the clubhouse, Marcus called a formal meeting of the Atlanta chapter. All members present, he stood before them with a proposal that would change the direction of their brotherhood. "We've got space, here," Marcus had said. "We've got resources. We've got brothers who know what it's like to be forgotten. So, here's what I'm proposing. We start a program for homeless kids. Kids like Jamal who are surviving alone because the system failed them. The vote was unanimous. They called it Jamal's Law. Not a legal statute, but a code within their chapter. A commitment that any child in genuine need, any kid surviving on the streets without family or support, would have a place with them. Not as charity cases, not as projects, but as family. Within a year, 3 more children had found homes within the brotherhood. A 15-year-old girl who'd been couch surfing after aging out of foster care. Twin boys whose mother had died and whose father was serving time. A 14-year-old who'd run from an abusive household and refused to go back. Each one was vetted carefully. Each one was given structure, protection, education, and belonging. Each one was taught the same lessons Jamal had learned. That family isn't about blood. It's about choice. That survival isn't enough. You have to live with dignity. That being helped doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. The Atlanta chapter's initiative made local news, then regional news, and that's when something unexpected happened. 3 other motorcycle clubs across Georgia, chapters that had no formal affiliation with the Hells Angels, clubs that operated independently with their own traditions and territories, reached out to Marcus. They'd seen the coverage, read the stories, and they wanted to do the same thing. And here's what nobody expected. Jamal's story inspired 3 other motorcycle clubs in Georgia to do the same thing. Dozens of homeless children now have families because one boy was brave enough to help a little girl in a park. The Vagos in Savannah, the Mongols in Macon, and an independent club called the Desert Riders in Augusta. All of them started their own versions of the program. All of them opened their clubhouses and their lives to children who needed them. Within 3 years, 47 children across Georgia had found families through motorcycle clubs. 47 kids who'd been invisible, forgotten, or abandoned now had homes, structure, protection, and love. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. These clubs, organizations that society often painted as dangerous, as criminal, as threats to be feared, were doing more for vulnerable children than most government programs. They weren't doing it for recognition or tax breaks or positive publicity. They were doing it because they understood what it meant to be cast out, to be judged, to be told you don't matter. Marcus was asked about it once during a local news interview that Jamal and Sophia watched from the clubhouse couch. "Mr. Harper, why do you think your organization has been so successful with these children when traditional systems struggle?" Marcus had thought about it for a moment, then answered simply, "Because we don't see them as problems to be solved. We see them as people who deserve a family, and maybe that's all any kid really needs, someone who sees them." But later that night, after the cameras left and the clubhouse settled into its evening rhythm, Marcus said something different, something quieter, something truer. Jamal was doing homework at the dining table. Sophia was sketching in the corner, her colored pencils spread across the floor. The brotherhood was scattered throughout the building, living their lives in the comfortable chaos of family. Marcus stood in the doorway watching all of it, and Dutch heard him whisper, "I thought I was saving him. Turns out he saved all of us." This story proves that the smallest act of kindness can change everything. If you believe people like Jamal and Sophia deserve to be celebrated, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I hunt down these stories to remind you that humanity is still good. Comment "Thank you, Jamal" down below if this story moved you. And if you know someone who's struggling, who feels invisible, share this video with them. Let them know they matter. Let them know their story isn't over. Because sometimes miracles don't just happen to one person. Sometimes they ripple outward, touching lives we'll never even know about. And it all started with a barefoot boy, a blind little girl, and 30 seconds in a park that changed